I borrowed my mom's laptop and found a secret folder. Inside were holiday photos without me, family dinners, my brother's graduation, and I was never invited. The next day, I cut them off. What happened next changed everything. I, 32M, thought I knew my family. 3 months ago, that certainty shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the aftermath has left me questioning everything I believed about loyalty, love, and revenge. My laptop crashed during a crucial work presentation deadline. Panic mode kicked in as I realized all my files were trapped on a dead machine. Mom lived 20 minutes away and had always been generous with her tech, so I called asking to borrow her laptop for a few hours. She seemed hesitant, which struck me as odd since she'd never minded before, but eventually agreed. Her laptop was password protected, and when I called for the code, she gave it reluctantly. I logged in, opened a browser, and started accessing my cloud storage. That's when I noticed a folder on the desktop labeled Family Memories 2019 to 2024. Innocent enough. My cursor hovered over it. Something compelled me to click. The first photo hit me like a physical blow. Thanksgiving dinner, last year. The whole family gathered around the dining table I'd helped Dad build 10 years ago. Mom, Dad, my brother Jake, his wife Sarah, their 2 kids, even my aunt and uncle from across the state. Everyone was there, laughing, raising glasses and a toast. Everyone except me. I scrolled frantically through hundreds of photos spanning 5 years. Christmas mornings with gifts piled high. Easter egg hunts in the backyard. Jake's college graduation ceremony where he received his master's degree. 4th of July barbecues. Birthday parties for the kids. Anniversary celebrations. Holiday after holiday, milestone after milestone, captured in vivid detail. Not one photo included me. Not a single empty chair suggesting I'd stepped out momentarily. No evidence I'd ever been invited, considered, or even thought of during any of these occasions. My hands shook as I continued scrolling. There were photos from restaurants I'd never been to with them, vacation trips I'd never heard about, family game nights that apparently happened regularly. In one particularly devastating image, they were all wearing matching Christmas sweaters. Even the kids had custom ones made. The photo was dated 3 months ago, right around when I'd called Mom asking about Christmas plans, and she'd told me they were keeping it small this year. 5 years of secret family gatherings. 5 years of being systematically excluded while being told they were too busy or nothing special planned whenever I tried to arrange visits. I sat staring at that laptop screen for 2 hours, my chest tight with a pain I couldn't name. This wasn't neglect or oversight. This was deliberate, calculated. They'd made a conscious choice to have a family life without me, while maintaining just enough contact to keep up appearances. That night, I didn't call to confront them. Instead, I made copies of everything. Screenshots, downloads, the works. If they wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules. The next morning, I sent a group text to my parents and Jake. I told them I'd seen the photos and knew about their secret family gatherings. I wrote that I was done pretending we had a relationship when clearly they'd already decided we didn't. I blocked all their numbers, deleted them from social media, and changed my emergency contacts at work. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. They'd recruited friends and extended family to reach me. The messages ranged from confused to angry to pleading. Apparently, my sudden disappearance had caused quite a stir at the weekly Sunday dinner I'd never been invited to. Uncle Mark texted from his number saying my parents were devastated and claiming there had been some misunderstanding. I responded with a single photo from Mom's folder, the Christmas sweater picture, and told him to ask them to explain the misunderstanding. He never replied. For 3 weeks, I held firm. The attempts to contact me intensified. They showed up at my apartment building, but I'd moved out the day after sending that text, staying with a friend while I figured things out. Work became my sanctuary. My colleagues noticed I seemed different, lighter somehow, despite the obvious stress. My boss even commented that I seemed more focused without family drama weighing me down. Then Jake's wife, Sarah, managed to track down my new number. She called crying, saying the kids kept asking where Uncle was and why he wasn't coming to dinner anymore. She claimed she'd pushed for me to be included in gatherings, but Jake and my parents had always said I was too busy with work or preferred doing my own thing. According to Sarah, they'd convinced themselves I didn't want to be involved in family activities because I'd declined a few invitations years ago when I was working excessive hours at my previous job. She said they'd started having gatherings without me to avoid putting pressure on me, and it had gradually become routine. I listened to her explanation, but something felt off. If that were true, why were the photos hidden in a secret folder? Why had Mom been hesitant about lending me the laptop? Why had they lied about keeping Christmas small when they'd clearly had a massive celebration? I told Sarah I'd think about it, and hung up. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I reached out to my cousin Emma, who lived in another state but stayed in touch with extended family gossip. I asked her casually about recent family gatherings, pretending I'd been too busy to attend but was curious how they went. Emma's response floored me. She told me that for the past several years, my family had been telling relatives that I'd become difficult and demanding, and that I'd caused scenes at family gatherings. According to the story they'd been spreading, I developed anger issues and made everyone uncomfortable, so they'd started having smaller gatherings to keep the peace. None of this was true. I hadn't caused any scenes, hadn't been difficult or demanding. In fact, I'd barely been around to cause problems because I was rarely invited to anything. They'd been systematically destroying my reputation within the extended family while simultaneously excluding me from events, then using my absence as evidence that I was the problem. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Update 1. I confronted Emma with this information, and she revealed something that changed everything. 3 years ago, at a family reunion I'd actually attended, Jake had apparently told several relatives that I was jealous of his success and had been making snide comments about his marriage and career. The problem? I barely spoke to Jake at that reunion. We'd exchanged pleasantries, I'd congratulated him on a recent promotion, and I'd spent most of the time helping with setup and playing with the kids. I couldn't even remember having a substantial conversation with him, let alone making snide comments. Emma admitted she'd found it strange at the time because it didn't match the person she knew, but family gossip travels fast, and she'd assumed there was truth to it. I realized this went deeper than simple exclusion. They'd been actively sabotaging my relationships within the family for years, creating a narrative that justified their behavior while making me look like the villain. Armed with this information, I made a decision that would either restore my family relationships or destroy them permanently. I created a detailed timeline of events, including screenshots of the photos, records of my attempts to stay in touch with my family, and testimony from friends who could vouch for my character during the period when I was allegedly becoming difficult. I compiled it into a comprehensive document that told the real story. Then I sent it to every single family member whose contact information I had. Not just immediate family, aunts, uncles, cousins, even family friends who'd been told I was the problem. The response was immediate and explosive. Update 2. Within 24 hours of sending that document, my phone was ringing constantly. Extended family members were furious, not at me, but at my parents and Jake. Several relatives admitted they'd thought something was off about the stories they'd been told, but hadn't questioned them because they trusted my parents. Aunt Linda called me sobbing. She said she'd been planning to reach out to me directly several times over the past few years because she missed our conversations, but Jake had warned her that I was going through a difficult phase and might react badly to contact. She'd respected that boundary, not realizing she was participating in my isolation. My cousin David was livid. He'd apparently been excluded from some gatherings too, after asking too many questions about why I was never around. Now he understood why. They couldn't afford to have anyone who might notice the pattern or question their narrative. But the most devastating call came from my grandmother. She was 89 years old and lived in an assisted living facility 2 hours away. Through tears, she told me that for the past 3 years, whenever she'd asked about me during their visits, my parents told her I was too busy with my life to visit elderly relatives. She'd been hurt, thinking I'd grown cold toward her, but hadn't wanted to pressure me. I drove to see her that same day. When I walked into her room, she broke down crying. We spent 4 hours together, and she told me story after story about asking my parents to bring me along for visits, only to be told I'd declined or was unavailable. She'd been dying thinking her grandson had abandoned her, when in reality, I'd never been given the opportunity to be there. That night, I made a decision about revenge. Update 3. I didn't want money or dramatic confrontations. I wanted something much simpler, the truth to have consequences. I started reaching out to family members individually, not to bash my parents and Jake, but to rebuild relationships they'd tried to destroy. I organized my own gatherings. I invited cousins to dinner, planned outings with aunts and uncles, started visiting my grandmother regularly. Within 2 months, I'd become the family member who actually showed up. While my parents and Jake had been curating their perfect family image through secret gatherings, I was building real relationships through consistent presence. The annual family reunion was approaching, a large gathering that included extended family from 3 states. Traditionally, my parents organized it. This year, several relatives asked if I would help coordinate instead. I agreed, but with one condition: I would organize everything transparently. Everyone would be invited to everything. No secret planning, no behind-the-scenes exclusions. When my parents found out I was co-organizing the reunion, Dad finally called me directly. He broke down crying, admitting they'd made terrible mistakes and begging for forgiveness. He claimed they'd never meant for things to go so far, that it had started small and spiraled out of control. I listened to his apology, and then I asked him a simple question. If he was truly sorry, why had Mom been hesitant to lend me her laptop? Why were the photos in a hidden folder? He couldn't answer. The truth was, they weren't sorry they'd excluded me. They were sorry they'd been caught. The family reunion became a turning point. Over 40 relatives attended, and throughout the weekend, the contrast became clear. I'd organized activities that included everyone, made sure elderly relatives had transportation, coordinated with parents to accommodate their children's needs. I was present, engaged, and genuinely interested in everyone's lives. My parents and Jake attended, but they seemed like strangers in what should have been their element. Several relatives commented privately to me about how different the dynamic felt, how much more inclusive and warm the gathering was compared to recent years. Final update. It's been 6 months since I discovered those photos. The revenge I'd planned turned out to be the most effective kind, simply being the person they'd prevented me from being all along. I now have close relationships with extended family members who'd been told I was difficult. My grandmother and I talk every week, and I visit her twice a month. She tells me I've brought joy back into her life. Several cousins have confided that they'd noticed the exclusion pattern years ago, but hadn't known how to address it without causing family drama. Now that the truth is out, they feel free to maintain relationships with both sides of the family divide, though most have clearly chosen sides. My parents and Jake have tried multiple times to reconcile, but their efforts feel hollow. They want forgiveness without accountability. They want me to understand their perspective without acknowledging the deliberate cruelty of their actions. Most tellingly, they want to move forward without explaining to relatives why they'd spread false stories about my character. Sarah, to her credit, has been the most genuine in her remorse. She's admitted that she went along with their narrative because it was easier than questioning it, and she's worked to rebuild trust by being completely transparent about family plans going forward. The kids are thrilled to have their uncle back in their lives, which has been the one purely positive outcome of this entire situation. As for revenge, I learned something unexpected. The best revenge against people who tried to erase you from their story is to write your own story so compellingly that everyone wants to be part of it. My parents created a family dynamic based on exclusion and manipulation. I'm building relationships based on inclusion and honesty. Time will tell which approach creates lasting bonds. The secret folder showed me who they really were. My response showed them who I really am. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply being better than the people who wronged you and letting everyone else draw their own conclusions. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.